Good to be with you guys again. We are in week 2 of this series where we're talking about prayer. And like I mentioned last week, prayer, I believe, is so beautiful. It is so powerful. But can we also admit that prayer can be very confusing? Prayer can be mysterious. And can we just admit that sometimes prayer can be frustrating? As we grow up and we're told to say our prayers and we pray for our circumstances or circumstances of our loved ones to change, quite often we don't get the answer yes back. I don't think we get an audible no very often, but we get a silence to where it can leave us, if we're just looking at prayer as a way to change our circumstances, thinking, okay, prayer, does it even work? Because it's not like we pull the lever on the slot machine and we get what we want. It's not like we rub the lamp and the genie gives us exactly what we wish for. There's more going on than just trying to get something that we want. And so in this series, I'm encouraging us to go on this journey to grow up a little bit with the way that we think about praying, because I do believe that there's a way that we can pray, and there are things that we can pray for that God will always say yes to. And yeah, I know that sounds ridiculous, but I believe it to be true. But we need to shift the way that we're praying, the posture in which we pray, and we need to shift what we are praying for. And I think when we shift our posture, the way we're praying and what we're praying for, God not only will say yes to that prayer, but God will change us from the inside out. And I think from there, he'll change the world around us. Because as we said last week, we want to pray prayers that put us in a place to lock arms with God and what he is up to and active doing in the world. We want to partner with God to bring the up there down here in our lives and in our families and in our world. So today we're going to look at a different one of these dangerous, maybe uncomfortable prayers that we can pray that God will always say yes to. But first I want to ask you this question. Have you ever maybe been around somebody where their reaction or their interaction towards you, you're like, where in the world did that come from? It seems like there's something else going on underneath the surface because your response was crazy, right? Have you ever been around somebody like that? Or maybe you found yourself reacting in a way where you're like, man, where did that come from? I don't know why I'm so angry. I don't know why I'm so stressed out. And I acted that way. There's often times in our relationships and in the way that we walk through the world where I like to say, like, this is about that. There's the thing we think it's about, but then there's the thing underneath the thing. And that's where we're really changed. And that's what's really motivating us to do things. Just to give a couple examples of what I'm talking about with this is about that reality. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. Our 3-year-old, Jack, he's like what we'd like to call clinically strong-willed. A little bit. He's 3, so he's a 3-nager. And he throws temper tantrums, especially when we ask him to do something that he's not prepared to do, or the timing is not what he was thinking of exactly on his daily calendar, right? So every now and again, we are just so mean as parents that we're like, hey, you need to like wash your hands because you've been playing out in the dirt, and he just loses it, right? And my wife, she's so incredible. She's like just this Jedi mind trick every now and again on Jack, and it works most of the time, where instead of just like, I just want to be like, no, Jack, you're doing this. My wife gives Jack options, and she'll be like, well, you can wash your hands outside with the hose, or you can wash your hands in the bathroom over here. But she gives him options, and all of a sudden, most of the time, he's like, okay, I choose this. He chooses one of the options. Because for him, it's not only that we're asking him to wash his hands and he doesn't want to wash his hands, it's that he feels like he has no decision-making power in the moment. He needs choices. Because this is about that. It's really about him not feeling like he has power to make the decisions. So my wife, who is the resident Jedi master in our house when it comes to parenting, she pulls this. I don't know, in marriage or in a romantic relationship, if you've ever had an interaction that seemed to be very benign, like sitting at a table and you're like, hey, can you pass the ketchup? And you don't get the ketchup passed to you, you get the ketchup thrown at you because like something else was going on, and you find out later that you said something that was very offensive earlier, and they're still holding on to that, and that's why it wasn't the gentle passing the ketchup. It was, you've got catsup all over your face, right? Because this is about that. I just recently, another example, I found myself driving, and I was just right on Markland, and the light turned green. I'm the second car in line, and this car in front of me, they just weren't moving at all. And I'm like, what is going on? All of a sudden my blood started boiling a little bit. And like, I'm like, is he's on his phone. He's on his phone. Oh, this is so ridiculous. And so I'm like, what am I going to do? And I'm like really upset about it. And to where I lean on my beep, a little bit, just a little bit. I didn't lay on it. I just beeped it a little bit. But my blood is boiling. I'm like, I'm so angry that they're just on their phone. They're not moving. And then later in the day, I realized that that was probably 3 seconds. All of that was for one Mississippi. It was not that long. It did not change anything in the course of my day, but I was pretty hot and bothered about it, right? You ever have experiences like that where you're like, what is actually going on? Because I shouldn't have been that upset about this thing at all, because this is about that. Oftentimes, our emotions are a little out of whack, and they kind of surprise us, right? I ran across this quote years ago by clinical psychologist Dr. Dan Allender. He said this about our emotions. I think this is so powerful. He said, emotions are like messengers from the front lines of the battle zone. Our tendency is to kill the messenger, but we need to listen carefully if we want to win the battle. Our emotions, they're trying to tell us something. They're messengers saying that something's going on. It's like the check engine light on our vehicle, and we need to do something about them. And maybe you grew up in a family where you were told not to deal with your emotions, not listen to your emotions, not do anything with your emotions, and we try to silence them in that way. Sometimes we try to silence them because they're inconvenient, and they're telling us we've got to work on something that we don't feel like we've got time or energy to work on. But Dr. Allender tells us we need to pay attention to them, listen to them carefully if we want to win the battle. And for you and I, for us to listen to our emotions, to take check on what's going on beneath the surface and beneath what people can see on social media, we need to slow down to self-reflect, to ask questions of ourselves, to examine ourselves. And man, we are living in a time where that is not popular, that is not rewarded, and that is not easy to do at all, to examine ourselves, to search ourselves to see what's going on underneath the surface. There's lots of reasons why it's not easy or popular or rewarded, but one of the reasons why it's so hard for us to slow down and ask ourselves, how am I doing? Is because we are so busy. From the time that your alarm clock goes off or that baby starts screaming from the crib, that might be your alarm clock like it is in our house. From the time you wake up to the time you crash onto the pillow at the end of the night, you feel like you are running a race and you have no time to slow down. You're not thinking about the decisions you're making. You're just reacting to the events on the calendar, the latest text, the email, and the demands of motherhood, fatherhood, your work life, and all the responsibilities that you have. It's where you're like, you can't imagine slowing down and actually thinking, how am I doing? Why did I respond that way? We're not rewarded for it. Our pace is so out of control that we never reflect and ask ourselves, how are we doing? Another reason why we don't slow down and examine ourselves, search ourselves, is because for some of us, if things get too quiet and we just are alone with our thoughts, it freaks us out. This is why many of us, we have the TV on all the time in the background. We're always got music playing in our car. We've always got something going on in the background because it freaks us out to actually slow down and have silence to hear what's going on. We might not like what we find if it's just us and our thoughts, right? And it might lead us to have to do something about it. And the other reason I think why we don't slow down and reflect on how we're actually doing is because it might require us to change something. And change is not instantaneous. In our Western American culture, we love taking a pill because we think popping a pill is going to change everything. And often what we discover, if we're alone with our thoughts and examine how our interactions, our reactions throughout a day went, we don't like it at all. And it leads us to this point where we're like, we got to do something about this, but within it, we think about how much energy it's going to take, or sometimes going to counseling, how much money it's going to cost. And knowledge is responsibility, and we don't want to have the knowledge in the first place. But I'm challenged by what Socrates, the Greek philosopher, thousands of years ago, what he said about a life that's not searched, a life that's unexamined. Socrates said this, that the unexamined life is not worth living. Dang, Socrates, right? A life that's unexamined, a life that we just sort of are sleepwalking through on cruise control, just reacting to, and it's not worth living. And I'll just take it a step forward, and I'll say this. I don't think that you should just end your life if your life is unexamined, but I think Jesus would beckon us The God of the scriptures, the God that we're gathered here to learn about and to follow and partner with, I think he would say that an unexamined life is just less than you were created for. And Jesus would lean into us and challenge us to be searched, to understand what's going on underneath the hood so that we don't just respond to what life puts in front of us, but we're leading a life that we want to lead, that God created us for. So this is what this dangerous prayer that we're going to look at, what it says today, and how it gets beneath the surface, under the hood of our lives so that we can live a life that we were created to live. It's simply this: search me, God. Like, search me. Look underneath the hood of what's going on in my life, God. Search me. And this prayer, this is what I'm calling an inconvenient or dangerous prayer, because you can't pray this and stay the same. It's found in the book of Psalms in our Old Testament, written by King David, the psalmist. And if you don't know much about the scriptures, you sort of come into faith, again, sort of examining this whole thing. The book of Psalms is this massive part of the Hebrew scriptures, the first part of our Bible. And it's just full of prayers, and it's full of songs. It's sometimes full of celebration songs, songs of joy and gladness. There are other times that they're full of prayers of lament and sadness and grief. And there's these prayers from the mountaintop, and there are these prayers from the valley, most of them written by King David, who is a leader over God's people, the nation of Israel, back way before Jesus. And in Psalm 139, we find David, who's most scholars believe he's reflecting on all of his life. And he says this at the end of Psalm 139, this prayer that I want to encourage us to pray as well. David says this: search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. What a beautiful, heart wide open prayer to this God that he had an intimate relationship with, that I think that you and I, we can learn from this morning. So let's break this down. There's a couple things I want us to see happens when we pray, search me, God, in this way. So let's look deeper at the beginning of this prayer. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Now, there are three verbs that are used here in this verse that I want to dive deeper into, because I think sometimes on the surface of just us being English-speaking people, we miss some of the beauty and the gem underneath the dirt of these words. So the first word there, search, is not like what we think of, like, getting on a computer or like searching on Google on our phone, just like real quick, like I just got to find out the answer, like where did Tom Petty, where was he born? So we like search something really, really fast, right? Which is Gainesville, Florida, if anybody's wondering. It's more than that. The word search in the Hebrew language is the Hebrew word haker. Can you guys say haker on the count of three? And you got to get a lot of going on there, right? Haker. 1, 2, 3. Haker. Oh, that was good and phlegmy. That was really good. But more than just to search, a quick Google search, haker means to explore, to thoroughly examine, to look deep within. Not just the surface, not just quick, but to thoroughly examine, like seeing a doctor for a physical, and they're looking at every nook and cranny of who you are. It's not something that's instantaneous, but it's something that is beneath the surface. The next verb that we see here, David says, God, I want you to know my heart. And the Hebrew word for know is not just like a knowledge no, but it's actually the Hebrew word yada. Sort of, you've ever heard like Yiddish, yada, yada, yada. It's the Hebrew word yada. Can you guys on the count of three say yada? 1, 2, 3, yada. And that's to know. It's not just a knowing a fact, like that Tom Petty was born in Gainesville, Florida, but it's an experiential knowing. It's to experience something. Yada is actually used in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures, for sexual intimacy. A man yadas a woman in that way. And so what David is connotating here, what he's wanting us to understand, is that we're inviting God to know us intimately to be connected with us intimately, to know things that are beneath the surface, things that we just portray but know on the inside out. Not just head knowledge, but experiential knowledge. The last verb that's used here is to test me. And a lot of times in our Western understanding of testing in school, we think this is just like, give me this question and I'm going to give you the right answer. But test is actually the Hebrew word bakan, like pecan, right? Bakan. I'm not going to make you guys say one more word here, but bakan is more of a testing of like understanding the strength of something. I'm sorry, my mic's going a little crazy here, I apologize. But bakan is to test something, the strength, the purity of something, like a blacksmith who's scrutinizing the strength and the integrity of a metal, examining the purity of a metal like gold and silver to make sure that it is what it should be, not just what it appears to be. Now, when you look at these three Hebrew verbs, you're like, okay, that sounds pretty intense, and it might sound even a little scary to us, right? I mean, scary for us to consider God looking that closely at who we are. So we might think that that's going to leave God to be angry. That's going to leave God to want to punish us, to move away from us. And that's natural for us to think that, especially in the first, the last century before the birth of Jesus, where people would be thinking like God is out to get them, is angry at them. But what David says and what he reveals to us is that we find something really beautiful. Actually, earlier in this psalm, we see David say, like, God, you have searched me and you do know me. And David says this about the reality of God searching him. He says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light will become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. In other words, we might try to run away and hide, but God will find us there. We cannot hide from him. And when he finds us, he doesn't shame us, but he embraces us. If we go to the heights of the highs and the lows of the lows, he still finds us and embraces us. Right now, one of the favorite things that Jack wants to play at home is hide and seek. And I don't know, have you guys ever played hide and seek with like a toddler, a little kid before? They are so bad at it, right? I'm like, buddy, that's the worst hiding spot. I see you behind the curtain. I see your feet. I hear you giggling. Like, you are not good at this, but it's so stinking cute, right? I think in some ways, we think that we need to hide from God, that like so much of our journey is like making sure that people don't hear things about us, know things about us, and somehow we think that maybe God doesn't either because we can hide from him. But I think we're just like the toddler who's bad at playing hide and seek. And, God will allow us to hide, but man, he doesn't want us to hide. And he sees us. He knows you from the inside out. I mean, this is such incredible news, you guys. He sees you. He sees the good. He sees the bad. He sees the ugly. He doesn't just see your actions. He sees your motivations underneath of the actions. And yeah, there can be some things that are off kilter, but inside of all of it, he's still seeking after you. You can't hide from him. He wants to embrace you because darkness is like the light to him. He sees it all and he still loves you. We might think that we should hide or need to hide, but that's not the case. I mean, we'll just put it this way. I think this is a powerful thought that changes so much for me, and I hope it does for you too, but being known by God, being seen and searched by God, it doesn't lead to shame and guilt. It leads to a space to be found and to be embraced. Because the God of the universe, he already knows you, even if you don't come to him or not. And he wants you to know that you are embraced. And it's in that embrace, it's in that you being found that you are changed not only from the outside, but you're changed from the inside out. I want you to hear that wherever you are and whatever mess you find yourself in this morning, that you are cherished. You are embraced. You are found. There is mercy for you. There is a next step for you in the fold of what God is doing. And he sees you and he still wants to partner with you. He wants to call you a son or a daughter because you are found and embraced. And that's good news that changes so much for me. that we're found. When we allow God to search us, we're found and we're embraced and we're invited to walk with God. Now, the next thing that David prays in this dangerous prayer that God will always say yes to is this. He says, see if there is any offensive way in me. God, I'm going to lay my heart bare. I'm going to put myself before you for you to search me and know my heart, my anxious thoughts. I want you to see if there's any offensive way in me. The next thing that we see here is David says, I want you to examine if there's a hidden, unknown sin in my life. And this is like we don't like to talk about this part of our lives and our relationship with God and faith. But like the reality is that you and I, we all have sin in our lives. It's all a part of who we are. Now, I'm not saying that God, when he looks at you, says that you are a filthy, dirty sinner that belongs in hell. Like that, I don't think that's the countenance, the face of God towards us in our sin. I also don't think that when we talk about sin, there's like this arbitrary long list of things that God finds to be gross because he is perfect and holy. And he's just got these lists of things like, nope, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that. That's not how God talks about sin. That's not how God works at all. The best definition that I've ever heard of sin, so powerful to me, is that sin is the culpable disturbance of shalom. Shalom is peace and harmony with God. It's God's plan for his people in relationship with him and others. And sin is when we disturb that, when we break that, when we bring toxicity into that. And my friends, you and I, we all break shalom. We break that peace and that harmony that we have between us and God. And we break shalom, that peace and harmony that we have between us and others. We all have patterns of behavior that are toxic in our lives with us and God, and they're toxic that we bleed out on other people. And God does not long for that to be a pattern or something that is driving our lives at all. So David says, God, I want you to search me to see if there's any offensive way in me, something in me that is harming me or harming others around me. You know, and David understood the toxicity that comes with sin. David, earlier in his life, a dark chapter of his life when he was king of Israel. When kings were supposed to be out fighting war, David wasn't. He was chilling at home, and he used his power to seduce a woman who was a married woman and took advantage of her, slept with her, and actually got her pregnant. And then David, in an attempt to cover the whole thing off, sent the woman's husband to the front lines of battle because he was sure that he would die, just wanted to cover it up. So this is some dark stuff that David went through. And David was confronted with this offensive way in him for the way that he broke shalom. And he brought his sin before God and received forgiveness and received a new way forward, which was so powerful. He didn't hide it. He didn't hide it for very long, but he ended up, after he was challenged, he brought it before God so that it could be dealt with, so he could be cleansed and move forward in his life. And I just wonder if there was something inside of David early on in his life in this offensive way that it started as something small, a little rebellion that he had away from God, a little way of him abusing or taking advantage of people early on, but he just left it unexamined, and it grew to where he took advantage of this woman named Bathsheba, and it grew to where he wanted to cover his tracks so much that he had a man killed. I think when it comes to our sin, when it comes to things that are breaking shalom in our lives, God is inviting us to slow down, be reflective, let him search us and examine the things in our lives that might be offensive to him so that it doesn't grow to something crazy later. My friends, we are all a couple, it's just no big deals away from terrible decisions that are going to blow up our lives and blow up the lives of other people as well. And I think one of the most dangerous places we can be is in a place where we are minimizing our sin or saying we're numb to what it does. Saying that, well, everybody's got something and I'm not as bad as them, or I know that God still forgives me for my sin, so it's not really a big deal. Guys, when you're justifying it like that, man, we're in a dangerous, dangerous place like David was. We should be careful not to let it grow and fester to where it feeds on us and it hurts other people. About 5 or 6 years ago, I started to have this tinge in my upper, right side of my mouth on a tooth when I had like something cold there. And I knew that it was probably something I should get checked out, but I also knew I didn't want to like slow down and go to the dentist. So what did I do? I didn't go to the dentist. I didn't deal with it at all. I just started like putting cold stuff on the other side of my mouth exclusively because I'm a mature adult. And it went on and it got worse and it got worse. And I was like doing everything I could to sort of medicate the issue. And I finally went to the dentist and I had to get a root canal. And after my root canal, I said root canal like woot canal. And I think so often when it comes to those offensive ways in us, the ways that we break shalom in our lives, if we would deal with it, if we would bring it before God, if we would let some trusted friends know it's what we're struggling with, man, I don't think it would grow and fester to the bigger thing. And that's the invitation that we have to let God see the offensive way in us and let him examine us. Lastly, David says this in this prayer. See if there's an offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Now, again, whenever we see everlasting in our Western mind, we go to like, lead me to go to heaven, to everlasting life, right? But that's not what David is praying here. David is saying, lead me in the way that is everlasting. Everlasting not being like a quantitative amount of time, but it's more of a qualitative. It's a quality of life. It's a life that's in rhythm with God, when you're in lockstep with God, where he is leading you in your everyday decisions and you guys are locked arms, partnered together on the path that he has for us. And the reality is that like God wants to partner with you. And if we lay ourselves bare, open our hearts to him, we are in a better position to be locked in step with him so that we can partner with him to bring the up there down here. But it takes intention. Like I mentioned earlier, because we're not reflective at all, I think so often we're just like wandering through our lives. We're kind of sleepwalking through our lives. Let me ask you this question. How many of you guys have ever like pulled into your driveway and you're like, how did I get here? I hope it doesn't happen to you often, but it's happened to me and it's a freaky thing, right? I think some of us, we're just walking through our lives that way. We're not really living our life. We're not leading our life. We're not having God lead it either. We're just reacting to it. We're just doing what we think we're supposed to do. And we end up in a place that we're like, how did I end up here? My friends, the invitation for us to lay ourselves before God, to have him search us and know us, is for him to intentionally lead us in the way everlasting. I'll tell you, the danger of us just sort of sleepwalking through our life is that we miss opportunities all around us to be a blessing. We miss opportunities. We're asleep to opportunities to serve others, to say yes to God, to partner with God, to be an encouragement to others, to invite and include the outsider, to encourage people to come hear about what God is doing in a faith community like here at Bridgeway. God wants to partner with us. He wants to lock arms with us and lead us in this way of everlasting, abundant life. Don't miss it. Don't sleepwalk through it. Because when we say, God, search me, God, know me, see if there's anything offensive in me, God, lead me in this way of everlasting life, it postures us to where our world can change. Not only your life, not only a few people that you love, their lives, but no, the world around us will change when we slow down. And we let God examine us, explore us, experientially know us, and change us from the inside out. So I want to give us like 3 practical steps. If this examining kind of search me kind of prayer is not a pattern in your life, I understand because it's not popular or rewarded. But 3 quick steps that I think you can start here this week. The first one is this. Make a quiet space. Transform some space or time in your life or some spot on your calendar from a normal space to a sanctuary, to a sacred place. For me, it's my car. On the way home from work, I examine my day. I am like, okay, what happened in my interactions? What happened in my reactions? Maybe for you, it could be like locking the bathroom door. If you've got like little kids always, dragging on your legs and stuff, lock the bathroom door. I'll admit that has been a sanctuary for me a lot over the last couple years, and we all need just a little bit of time. So it can be as simple as that. It can be a special chair or a desk or a room in your house. It can be a closet where you're not being disturbed, but make a quiet space so that you can like understand that you're in God's presence and just hear from him in that moment. The next step is this: examine your day. Actually reflect and look back on your day. Look back on your interactions, your reactions. Pay attention to like your emotions throughout the day. Examine your day. Like, are you tired, more tired than usual? Are you snapping at people? Like, what are your emotions telling you? What are the things that you're walking towards or walking away from, drifting away from? Are you walking towards God and things of God, like spiritual community, going to church, spending time looking at the scriptures and reflecting and praying? Are you gravitating towards that or away from it? Examine your day. And then lastly, this: invite God into whatever tension you find. I love Pastor Andy Stanley says this: pay attention to the tension. Because that's where God most of the time wants to do his best work. So invite God to any tension that you feel. Invite him to have his way in the tension. Remind yourselves, if something's off kilter, like, wait, what's ultimately true? Like, I lost 3 seconds of my commute down Markland Avenue. 3 seconds, like, come on, man. Let the truth combat whatever you're feeling in the tension. And then say, God, whatever is out of line with your way and your kingdom, remove it. Change me from the inside out. Invite God into that tension so that he can lead you in the way everlasting. A few years ago, there was a study, a survey done of a couple hundred people that lived to be 95 years old. And the question was asked, hey, what would you have done differently? Now that you've reached 95, knowing all the life that you've experienced and what you understand, what would you have done differently? And their answers were so awesome. The first answer was this: I would risk more. Second answer was, I would do more things that would live on after I'm gone. But the third answer is so interesting in our conversation today. The third answer of 95-year-olds, what would you change? Said this: I would reflect more. I would slow down and think about what was going on underneath the surface more. You guys, when we examine our hearts, when we say, God, search me, know me, challenge me, and lead me in your way everlasting, man, it brings us to be fully awake. So we see the world around us in truth. We see people around us. And we see what's actually happening. And we see the vision of what could be. Don't miss it. Find a way to sit down and make a quiet space, examine your day, and invite God into whatever tension you're found. Because God will say yes, and God will change you from the inside out.